Hi, everybody. George Veter Financial, welcoming you into kind of my mind on a Monday as we have been surviving a bear market this year. We're starting a new quarter, October. Want to give you my perspective and some tips on what we can do to manage our minds through a difficult moment. As I'm speaking, the market closes in 5 minutes. And we had a really good bounce back today. The Dow's up 791 points. My experience, having survived many bear markets in my life in this business, which is more than 30 years now, is the moment it feels the scariest is the moment of greatest opportunity. And that's when we actually should charge. And most of my personal wealth and the personal wealth of people that I have had the privilege of serving through the years comes with the decisions they make in these moments and the courage they exhibit. So I'm not discounting how scary they get. When the world gets negative, it's very tough to soldier through those moments and not let fear paralyze you. So I'm going to help you with how I deal with that process. Or first of all, to frame the market's movements this year. We all kind of know the deal, but we started the year concerned about COVID in China because of the manufacturing slowdown over there due to a zero tolerance policy for COVID, which was kind of exasperating already supply chain issues in the United States. So that was a worry point to start the year. And then in February, we had the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that scared everybody and created more supply chain issues. And of course, the sanctions against Russian oil definitely impacted our oil market and exasperated the third issue, which was the threat of inflation, which we've seen kind of all over, which makes sense coming out of the pandemic where we had a shutdown and a slowdown in manufacturing and the extraction of different natural resources. And then a big boom in spending. We had way more demand than supply, so prices go up. That's just kind of normal economics. And one thing led to another thing. Markets psychology got more and more negative throughout the year because inflation has been stubborn to overcome. We aren't talking as much about Russia and the Ukraine, and we aren't talking as much about COVID in China because those things are not nearly as directly impactful based on economists' assumption and feelings as the inflation threat. Our Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, he has raised rates 3 times 75 basis points each in a row, so it's very aggressive. And then he's told us that he's going to raise rates twice more this year, or to expect that, and then twice more next year. That's what we're anticipating. We know where he wants to go with the Fed overnight funds rate, 4.6. We know kind of what the pace will be to get there, and he's kind of on a determined path. But again, that's a finite period of time. We aren't going to be having the Fed raise interest rates forever, and we aren't going to be under the cloud of inflation pressure forever. In fact, on the front end of that pipeline, we have a lot of encouraging signs. We know oil is approximately $30 cheaper than where it peaked. We know building materials have drastically declined. I'm looking at what the contract is for 1,000 board feet of lumber this morning. It's at 422, and it was 1462 in March. Same thing with structural steel, big decline. Same thing with ag non-perishables. So soybeans, wheat, corn, all those things are about 30% off their high this year. So the leading indicators to ease inflation pressure are all going in our favor, but this lag time between those leading indicators and actually relief showing up at the grocery store are kind of what we're dealing with right now, because it doesn't happen instantaneously. Anyway, we're just approaching a quarterly earnings season. We know we're going to have some disappointments, but there's a very low expectation for quarterly earnings here in October. So I assume that we'll get through that without any big bombshells, even though there's always volatility. Typically, on a normal year, again, this year has been anything but normal, we do the best historically in the fourth quarter. Our highest average return for the S&P since World War II is in December. Our second highest is in November. Our third highest is in January. So that rolling quarter is usually when we make the most money on any given year. This year being challenging, the market super compressed, over 20% down. I think we got a good shot at that. Usually the turnaround is sometime in the middle of October between a negative psychology and a positive psychology, and that's because of earnings starting in earnest the second week of October. And then if there are some positive earnings releases like there have been the previous 3 quarters, then that kind of gets us going north right into holiday spending that happens in November and December, right on to the end of the year when we have our big contribution season for pensions. So that's kind of the flow that is in front of us, and I know we have things that we're going to have to deal with always, but in this moment where we're in a bear market territory, it's important that we do the things mentally to keep us from kind of getting paralyzed by that fear. So I'm going to tell you what I do. Every day I read things that help me to be positive. I read books by smart people that look at things not emotionally but analytically. That when we have a negative market like this, I love J.P. Morgan's famous saying that stocks return to their rightful owners. In other words, the people that bought stocks but didn't understand what they were buying and they get scared and sell when the market gets negative end up being bought by the people that understand the value of stocks. So that's why he says stocks return to their rightful owners in a bear market. I love that. People that sell low after buying high, I don't need to tell you. That's what our kind of impulse is, because we want to get out of the pain of the moment, but we know pragmatically that's a negative thing to do. So if we read things that encourage us, that will help us stay our course. The other thing that I do is I watch positive stuff for entertainment. I have a whole list of movies that are my go-tos that I watch. In fact, I've got them all on DVR where I can recall them anytime. And if I see myself or feel myself starting to get negative, I know I can go right to my highlights, to the times when those movies uplift me within the movie. I can just fast forward right to that time and watch a 20-minute segment that just makes me on top of the world again. I'll publish my list of go-to movies, and everybody's going to have different movies that uplift them, but you need to purposely put yourself in that mindset when the rest of the world around you is negative, for your own mental and physical health. And then also, I love to study historical patterns. So no matter what the opinions are today about politics or economics, we can look for historical parallels that help us make sense of things and give us encouragement. Just please look at what happened in the 1930s and 40s. We had the stock market crash of 1927, September 27th. That was devastating. We all know about that precipitated the Great Depression. But that negative period in the market lasted until June 1st of 1932, not all the way through the Depression. And then we had an explosion in the market. Between 32, 33, market was up 137%, the S&P was. And then the average return for the next 5 years in the middle of the 30s was 35.9, almost triple the normal stock market average. Read those things so you can see when it feels the worst, it's probably getting to the point where it's going to be the best opportunity for maximizing your wealth. And then look what those poor people endured in that era. So probably your grandparents, or maybe when you, depending on your age, maybe when you were a child, you remember your parents talking about it. Well, we endured the actual stock market decline and the financial depression where we had 40% of the banks failed. Can you imagine that? 25% unemployment. We're talking about things to be worried about, right? And then we had the worst drought we'd had in the history of the United States in the middle of the 30s, right? We had the Dust Bowl. We had Kansas and Texas and Oklahoma and other states that literally dried up, and because of over farming, Kansas blew into Texas and Texas blew into Oklahoma, etc. The breadbasket of the United States was threatened, right? And all those people fled to the cities where there was high unemployment, but some factory work to try to save their existences for their families. And then we had the war break out in Europe that we got entangled in 1941, World War II, the greatest war. Those things back to back with no break. Think about and you think about our time today, and it'll make you feel much better, just giving yourself some historical comparatives. And when we talk about high inflation eras, look at the late 70s, early 80s, when we had double-digit inflation. So during the Carter administration and the early years of the Reagan administration, those were tough moments, but it sparked an incredible rally, 1983 through 1987, then a pause, and then a huge rally through the year 2000, with some pauses. There's always some type of disruptions, but they were all temporary. The 80s and the 90s, the amount of wealth that was accumulated by investors that endured the difficult decade of the 70s, they were more than paid back. And by the way, if you are thinking that the politics of the day are prohibitive to economic growth, I'm not saying they don't make a difference, but there's never been a direct correlation. Economic cycle is economic cycle. Whoever's sitting in the White House just happens to be sitting in the White House. For example, in Jimmy Carter's one term, the S&P averaged 12.7% a year during that period of time, and he might not be in memory our greatest politician, maybe one of the greatest humans, but maybe not one of the strongest politicians. Just using him as an example. So, as long as you're invested correctly, you don't make one of the emotional mistakes that people make, this will be a painful memory that will be in our rearview mirror, this bear market. And we'll go on to the next bull and we'll safely guide you there. So, that's what I wanted to tell you today. Just keep hanging in there, keep communicating with me, I'll keep communicating with you, and we've got this. Have a wonderful October.